Have you ever compared your portrait drawings to other artists and felt like your portrait fell flat compared to theirs? You look at their art and your art and say to yourself, just how did they get to that level? I've been there too. Hey, hope you're doing great. Today in this video, I'm gonna walk you through some really practical exercises and advice that will instantly take your portraits to a higher dimension. These are the exact things I wish someone told me when I first started out, and I even show you live examples of my own work so you can see the fixes in action. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about sketching. To me, there are two main approaches. You either start out with a classic sketch or you begin with a blob. Personally, I prefer starting with a blob and slowly carving out the outlines and the shape of the face as I go along. But if you're a beginner, it's usually better to start with a traditional sketch. Sketching has never been my strongest suit, but I like to think of it as a way of mapping out the face and its proportions. The clearer and more accurate your sketch is, the less you struggle later on in the painting process. Except for me, I'll always choose the pain of starting from a blob. So for this portrait study, I went with a blob and then I carefully mapped out her features. Well, the placement of her features. Train yourself to see the face as a three-dimensional object, rather than a flat paper with symbols. If your portrait always ends up looking flat and cartoonish, this might be the biggest reason. One of the best exercises that helped me with this was studying references alongside the Asaro head. Here's what I used to do. I'd put my reference and the Asaro head side by side. I'd go find a good photo reference, then hop onto Sketchfab, adjust the Asaro head to match the reference, and start drawing the structural lines of the Asaro head directly on top of the reference photo. Then I would repeat the exact drawing process on a separate layer without the photo reference underneath. I practiced this exercise multiple times with multiple different references, and over time, the Asaro head really trained my eyes to see the face as a three-dimensional object, rather than just a flat surface with features drawn on top of it. Once you get used to seeing the face as a 3D object, you'll also start to understand how light and shadow actually wrap around the form instead of just sitting on the surface. That shift made everything click for me. The next thing I recommend every beginner to learn is to learn how to simplify complex shapes. If you feel overwhelmed every time you look at a reference, this is probably why your portrait fell apart. One thing I struggled with a lot as a beginner was simply understanding what I was looking at. Let me explain. When you're a beginner and look at a reference, what do you see? Oh, the eyes look this way, the mouth curves like that, the eyebrows are arched here, the shadow on the forehead goes this way, details here, more details there. You end up overwhelming yourself, and because you're trying to capture every single little detail individually, your portrait eventually ends up looking very messy. Don't see a face as a bunch of separate features, see it as a whole. Simplify all of the complexity in your mind and only focus on the essential. Let me show you how I will do that on this reference. You see how I simplified all the shapes and all the shadow shapes on this reference and all of her features and only left what's necessary for me. If I place now the Asaro head next to this simplified version of the reference, you can clearly see the similarities. Suddenly the face isn't just a bunch of features, it's just simple planes of light and shadow. For example, you see clearly the side plane of the jaw is one big shadow, the nose has clear planes, the central one catching the light, and the bottom one falling into shadow. This is how I perceive a reference when I first start painting. In my head, I'm not obsessing over every single little detail. Instead, I simplify the face into big clear shapes of color and start painting from there. Then as I go along, I gradually add more complexity and details on top. That is the secret. Simplification first, details later. Which gets me to my next point. Learn how to identify the light and shadow and separate between them. If your shading looks patchy or muddy or even inconsistent, chances are you're not clearly separating light from shadow. This can be very tricky, especially depending on what kind of reference you're using. One of the best ways to train your eyes for this is to strip away all the colors completely and work in grayscale. If you struggle with shading and light in your portraits, I highly recommend this exercise. Take a reference photo that has very clear, sharp shadow shapes. Grayscale the photo, then place it side by side with the Asaro head. Go to Sketchfab, search for the Asaro head, and then change the lighting and the position of the Asaro head till it matches exactly your reference photo. Then take your screenshot and upload it next to your reference. And then start doing grayscale painting studies. This method helped me a lot. By doing ton of these studies, I was able to understand not just where shadows go, but also how the light interacts with the planes of the face. Once you grasp that, it becomes easier, so much easier to add convincing lighting to your own portraits. Last but not least, learn how to pick your colors. If your portrait always looks muddy, dull, or unnatural, it's probably a color picking problem. Color picking and color theory are things that I still struggle with till this day. But here's a very simple rule of thumb that helps me a lot. If you take a look at the color wheel, most skin tone based colors always fall between the red and the oranges. That's your base. When you're picking shadow colors, move your cursor downward on the wheel. The further down you go, the more cool tone your shadow color will be. From there, move slightly to the left side of the triangle or square depending on what you have in your program. The further left you go, the more desaturated your color will be. Don't push it too far or your shadows will look dull and muddy. Keep it closer to a neutral balance. For the light source, you do the opposite. Move upward from your color base and choose a lighter shade in the color triangle. Personally, I like to pick a more saturated color for the light compared to the shadow because it makes the skin look more lively. And if you're still not sure, the easiest trick to learn how to pick your colors is to use the eyedropper tool on your reference and really observe how the colors will shift. For example, if I hover over the shadows in this reference, you'll notice how the hues shift downward in the color wheel. For lighter areas, they move upward. And if you check carefully, you'll see they usually stay near the middle of the triangle, not too far to the right, which makes them overly saturated, or not too far to the left, which makes them muddy. Another very important tip is to pay attention to how the environment affects the color of the skin of your portraits. Take this reference as an example. You can clearly see the blue light reflecting onto her skin and even showing up in the shadow. Where does that blue come from? The environment. In this case, the sky is casting that blue toned reflection on her face. If she were indoors, say in a room with yellow walls for example, you'd see yellow tones reflecting onto her skin instead. That's why sometimes you see artists adding blue tones into the shadows, especially on the neck. It's not just random, it's actually coming from the environment. At the end of the day, color is very subjective. It really depends on the mood and style you want to achieve in your art. Do you prefer bright, saturated, stylized colors, or do you want to lean into subtle, more realistic tones? My personal choice is softer, more realistic tones inspired by real life because I aim for a natural and believable look in my portraits. And that's it. Thank you so much for staying till the end, and I'm sorry if my voice didn't sound that good. This is my first time ever recording for a video. So yeah, if you found this helpful, make sure to hit the like button, and if you're serious about improving your art, consider subscribing because I've got more tutorials and breakdowns coming soon. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!